This episode of Dispatches from Planet Albany is brought to you with support by New York State United Teachers, which represents more than 600,000 educators and school-related professionals in New York. Dispatches is also supported by the public affairs firm O'Donnell and Associates. For more information, check out o'donnellsolutions.com. The idea that Eric Gonzalez has star power shows how inside the bubble you are. I think if Eric Gonzalez walked into basically anywhere in New York State, unless he had a sign that says, "Hi, I'm Eric Gonzalez," I don't think people would even have any idea who he is.
If this was another podcast, I might have not used star power, but we are on the Planet Albany podcast.
Sure.
I would love your listeners to write in, and if any listener does not know who Eric Gonzalez is, I'd be very interested in that.
I've also declared war on potholes, so here's the first shot across the bow.
Well, as you know, with Planet Albany, there's always something that makes the planet turn.
And it's this amazing view of D.C., and Eddie Vedder comes out, and he goes, "You have a cigarette?" And I've never smoked in my life, but if I had, I wish that was the moment.
And this strategy takes us from potholes to knotholes.
I would like to say it was a pleasure, Mr. Kim. But I'm on the road.
I'm David Lombardo, and this is Dispatches from Planet Albany, a podcast about power and policy in New York State government. And on this episode, in advance of Governor Kathy Hochul naming her running mate for 2026, we're handicapping the odds of some of the Democratic names that are out there, as well as some names not widely circulated. And to help me set the betting lines, I'm joined by Alex Elmasri, Vice President of Operations and Growth for the Parkside Group. Okay, so before we get into the potential contenders and the percent chances I have arbitrarily set for them, I want to talk about if the LGs matter, because I think as reporters or even people who are obsessed with politics, there's a tendency to overthink this and be like, well, this person's from this part of the state, they represent this demographic, they're going to deliver this voting block, they're going to be good on this issue, and I think that might be a little overblown. What do you think?
I think it's definitely overblown. I agree with you. It's the same thing with the vice presidential pick with the president. We're still going through this after Harris lost. Oh, if she picked Shapiro from Pennsylvania, would she have won? Right? Like we still are having that debate, a year plus later. So I would say the same thing applies to the state. I think it's overblown. The problem is, unless if you're picking another statewide figure, sure, X person can deliver the, 10,000 votes from their own county, but that is such a small percentage from the overall state, and their public figure is shaped like that. It ends up being a wash, I think, at the end of the day. You can argue there's probably minimal upside, but there could be potential downside, right?
Right.
Like everyone says, McCain picking Sarah Palin, was one of the reasons he lost, right? So I think you could say there's probably downside. Upside is probably limited.
So we are going to have this conversation about potential LGs through the lens of Governor Hochul, and I didn't plan on spending any time on who Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado is going to choose, largely because he's going to be scraping the bottom of the barrel most likely. And I don't know if my Rolodex goes that far down the ladder in terms of Democratic and progressive choices. But is there anybody that comes to mind for you off the cuff for the lieutenant governor choice for Antonio Delgado? Anna Maria Archila? They were opponents 4 years ago, but now she's got his back in 2026.
I think that, for Hochul, to your point, like obviously she has easier pickings. I think she can
Because
pick.
people might want that job.
Yeah, exactly. Although, the last few people haven't stayed there for too long. But for Delgado, I assume he's looking at, to your point, progressives. If I had to go through a list of people, it would probably be people who are not up for election this year, right? I don't
Sure.
see anyone giving up their jobs for then a chance to be the LG on, a campaign that has X percent of a chance to win. So I assume he's looking at folks, maybe city council people who can get a quote unquote free run.
Yeah.
That's where I would think.
Well, let's turn to the governor then and her choices. And I want to start with someone who fits an important box, and that is appealing to the Latino voters potentially, because that's something that we've heard a lot about, the calculus for the governor wanting to have more of a Latino vote outreach. So at 1% chance, I'm going to throw out aspiring Chief Judge Hector LaSalle. What do you think?
Is he still aspiring,
Well,
or is the aspiration over?
well, I still have a Hector LaSalle for Chief Judge sign in my office. So the dream is alive on the third floor of the Capitol. So would you go higher or lower than 1%
Well, I was
chance
gonna
for
ask,
Hector LaSalle?
can we go lower than one?
That would be 0%. That would be
Zero. I would put zero.
that's a lot of confidence.
Yeah.
Do you want to explain why you think Hector LaSalle will not rise from the dead to be the LG choice?
I think the governor is trying to, and what has worked well with her over the last couple months is court a broad-based coalition among Democrats, progressive, moderates, upstate, downstate. And I think LaSalle was probably one of the most divisive things she has done in her career politically.
But
Uh,
she united the Senate Dems against her.
Very good point. In terms of having people be angry at her, and why would she then go and do this thing that, had unions and many members of the Senate disagree with her on?
Counterpoint, LaSalle's Senate champion, Luis Sepulveda, now Senate Judiciary Chair, proving that we get multiple acts in life, and therefore Hector LaSalle is a safe bet at 1%. But in reality, I do think that's probably a 0% chance. But I want to move on then to two names that you floated, one that I had been kicking some tires on, and I want to take these as a pair. And this would be the what we'll call the sisters are doing it for themselves ticket, and it could either be New York City Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch or Queens District Attorney Melinda Katz. You get both of them combined at 5% chance. So would you like over or under 5% for either Jessica Tisch or Melinda Katz?
I would take closer to 10 on that, so a
Ooh.
little over.
So you'd be buying if this was a stock, if this was something
I would be
Kalshi was
buying.
taking action on.
I'll buy.
And why?
Having a strong downstate person and both of them kind of fit a good profile for the governor. Again, especially with DA Katz, she falls in the category, does not have to give up anything to run for LG. I think they're both strong picks for the governor. It makes sense. It'd also, I think, be a historic ticket, right? All female ticket, which
At least
is
for the major parties.
right, which is something good for the governor to tout. And look, I think public safety is going to be the number one issue, right? We've kind of moved from public safety to affordability. But there's no question last time the governor ran, the Republicans and the media beat her over the head talking about public safety. So this would kind of really protect that flank with either of those picks.
So experience is sometimes thought of as an important thing, and thinking about the 2008 Democratic presidential ticket, Barack Obama turned to Joe Biden. So if I'm Governor Kathy Hochul and I'm thinking experience at 6%, who has more experience than Brian Benjamin? He's
Who
on
has
a
more?
whole rehabilitation tour right now, exonerated in the courts, weighing his options. So would you like to go over or under 6% chance for former state senator and brief lieutenant governor Brian Benjamin?
I'm going to go under 6%, and that's nothing against Brian Benjamin. That is just, I think the governor, again, is trying to not do anything controversial. And I think
What would be controversial? He was exonerated,
hang on.
Alex.
I think that the press would give her a hard time about the pick.
Wow, that's very cynical. Okay, so sticking in the state Senate at 9%, while he didn't light up the New York City Democratic mayoral primary, he is still generally well liked. Brooklyn Democrat Zellner Myrie at 9% chance. Would you like over or under?
I'm going to take over.
And why?
Well, first of all, he had a great tweet about sneakers the other day.
Yes, it seemed thirsty to me. It was like, hey, put me in. I'm hip. The kids love sneakers. I can be your sneaker delegate.
And look, to your point, yes, he didn't light up the New York City mayoral primary, but I would say he got a lot of press out of that, right? Kind of built his profile.
You'll have to point me to those stories after we're done recording.
He raised some money, and I think, if the governor is looking for a downstate person who, to your point, people like, right, kind of not the controversial pick, quote unquote. No,
Mhm.
there's nothing negative to say there, right? If we're looking at this as a person where there's nothing negative, only upside, I think Myrie would be great. And, Myrie's a young person too, who can kind of connect with more of those voters. He's well liked in both conferences of the House, right? So that is a helpful point. And, at the end of the day, the LG provides over the Senate, and he's very well liked in the Senate. I kind of think he hits all points that you'd be looking for.
So
Um,
well liked in the Senate that I believe he had, what, one endorsement from his Senate Democratic colleagues in terms of
and
being their first choice or whatever?
well, there's multiple people in the Senate running for mayor, so it's hard to pick when you have
Yeah.
multiple colleagues.
Well, this is a slightly more realistic pick than some of the other ones. And so, because it's more realistic, I think we should consider the second part of this equation, which is it's not just who the governor wants, it's who is going to accept the job. And so,
Mhm.
do you envision a world, having probably worked with Zellner in some capacity, knowing him to some degree, that he wants to be the lieutenant governor of New York?
I have no inside knowledge on that. It's a lot of things you have to weigh to say yes or no, um, to be LG, right? You're kind of tying yourself to one thing for presumably 4 years. Obviously, given our current situation or whatever, previous LGs, that doesn't necessarily always happen, but you're giving up also some independence that you have as, DA Katz, State Senator Myrie. You are at the end of the day beholden to what the governor gives you as a portfolio. I think with a lot of this, for some of these folks who have a longer career ahead of them, such as Myrie, I think it probably comes down to what is the portfolio that the governor is going to give you. Or are you just going to be, doing ribbon cuttings in Coxsackie, New York, 3 times a week?
Well, yeah, you mentioned the idea of a portfolio, and what we did see with Brian Benjamin during his brief tenure as lieutenant governor was that he did take on a criminal justice portfolio with Governor Hochul's administration, and I could see Zellner Myrie being interested in the policy side of things, and he's already used to making the trip up to Albany, but I don't necessarily see him that interested in traveling the rest of the state for those other obligations to launch XYZ task force, to be the co-chair of whatever council. I just wonder how appealing that is. And I also wonder what he actually brings to a ticket electorally. But as you said earlier, I don't think necessarily anyone is requiring him to deliver all the votes in Brooklyn for Hochul to be elected again. Let's move on. I'm going to pick a name that I chose as the person that I thought the governor should choose last year when we had a little draft on the Dispatches podcast, and that is Queensborough president. And is it Donovan or Donovan?
The latter.
Donovan Richards. And I'll leave that in because I'm all about radical transparency here at Dispatches. I think he's got a good portfolio. I think he has an adaptable sort of political ideology that kind of fits different situations. And I think he can be a lot of things to a lot of different people. And based on his social media presence, he's not antagonistic to the governor and seems to be more willing to go to bat for her in a way that you'd want from an LG. So I'm going to put Donovan Richards at 15%.
I'm going on the over there. I think, why I would not go on a hyper over is I think goes to something we talked about before. If he would accept taking it, not that he has anything against the governor, being borough president is a really great job where you do have a lot of independence.
Independence
Um,
to do what? You got to explain this to me. As somebody who lives 2 hours north. My understanding is you like oversee some real estate stuff and basically can run for a different New York City office in the future.
Correct, but again, like you get press, right? You get a lot of press, and you get to focus on New York City. I mean, look, maybe he can talk to the governor about getting a portfolio that does focus a lot on New York City. But like you were just saying, does he have to go be the head of the North Country Council also and
Yeah.
spend 2 days a week in the North Country? And then that takes you out of kind of potentially running for something citywide in the future because you're not spending every day working the New York City media market and, Queens alone. I think he'd be a great pick. Obviously, I think he would add a lot to the ticket. I think, he kind of does go over that ideological divide, moderate, progressive. The question is it the right time, right place for both the governor and him?
Some challenges need someone who simply won't quit. Modern advocacy brings tenacity, strategy, and unwavering follow-through to every client it serves. Learn more at modernadvocacyllc.com. Right time, right place. I'm wondering if we can take a step aside for a second. Do you envision the governor running in 2030 as well? Kathy Hochul would be 71 4 years from now, not crazy old in terms of politics based on the new norm that has been set, but she will have served 9 years at that point, assuming she gets reelected. So, sticking with radical transparency and accountability, what's your prediction right now? Does she run for reelection in 2030?
Yes.
Okay. So let's move on then. And we're going to go to a person who I know virtually nothing about, except for that he views, or if he is interested in the LG job, it's as a potential stepping stone to attorney general. And this is Brooklyn District Attorney Eric Gonzalez, who I've got at 16% in my scientific calculations. What do you think?
Does it feels like a very specific percentage you got going there,
We
16.
ran the numbers, we don't mess with them, and that's what popped out. And we have Deloitte checking these.
I would put that more in the category, Donovan, as an over on your 16. Again, I think, borough-wide person also checks a previous box, which we discussed, public safety, also being, a Latino kind of, you check a lot of boxes there, a lot of important boxes. I think you'd be a really good pick. Again, he falls into the category of what can the governor offer to entice him into this by giving him a portfolio of stuff that he will feel the job is something good for him for his future, and he also finds interesting.
The idea of the identity politics, though, that a Latino to appeal to the Latino voters, are we still thinking that is a meaningful connection? Because thinking about how well Donald Trump specifically did with Latino voters in 2024, is there a case to be made that this is an outdated way of thinking and that just because they got a similar last name or, look the same or have some sort of shared background, voters who are Latino are going on some sort of other issues potentially?
I think that it's not about necessarily like, oh, he's there to appeal to Latino voters. I think it's also about like having representation on a statewide ticket that is important, right?
Isn't that more important to like the party leaders who are Latino who feel like they're taken for granted? Because I wonder whether
It's only
average.
the party leaders. It's also, your political base too, of broad base of coalition of Democrats. You want, again, to not do a pick that is going to make people feel upset among your, base of Democrats,
Mhm.
right? And I think that Gonzalez would almost do the opposite of like make people happy, like, oh, person of color on the ticket from Brooklyn, and that checks that box.
Okay, so staying in Brooklyn then, we're going former assembly member, now Secretary of State Walter Mosley, who I have at 17%. And I've directly asked him about his level of interest in this job and gave a very mealy mouth answered about how I'll do whatever the governor wants me to do whenever she wants me to do it. Didn't really sell himself at all in the answer. I look at him as someone who has lost an election, and to me, I think once a loser, always a loser in terms of, do I want to surround myself with you? But he has been making the rounds. I think people find him charming. I think he might be well liked amongst other Democratic elected officials, especially in the legislature. Maybe I'm wrong, but I could see that being a pick that comforts a lot of people and wouldn't be crazy given the fact that he already has the sort of statewide portfolio and has shown an interest or willingness to go around and visit the Albany High School and speak there and be a surrogate for the Governor Hochul.
I put Walter Mosley in the above 50% category. Someone who
5-0?
yeah. I think
Wow.
I've heard reports that he's been around the state in multiple areas. I think that he checks a lot of boxes for the governor. I think there's no real risk in that. To your point, everyone likes him. We talked about this earlier. Like, you don't want someone who's going to be fiending to run for your seat in 4 years, right? Which Gonzalez might be wanting to run for AG or governor, right? I think he kind of checks a lot of boxes and does not necessarily, try to run for something right away statewide. And I think there's minimal downside with picking Walter Mosley. Maybe he does not have like the star power of a Gonzalez or a Katz, but I would put Walter Mosley high on the list.
So Walter Mosley also comes from a political family, if I remember correctly. Was his mom involved in politics? Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, he comes from a political family, and I think they're also close with Leader Jeffries as well. They're kind of, deep in Brooklyn politics, which again, I think for the governor, kind of a smart pick in that kind of, going back to the point of broadening her coalition just across all Democratic bases. I think, again, it would be a smart pick.
Do you think I made a big mistake by not including Michael Blake on this list?
I do not.
Okay, good to know. All right, we're down to two names on the list, and up next at 27%, I have Assemblyman Brian Cunningham, who, at least publicly, is the thirstiest when it comes to being lieutenant governor. His team even solicited an interview that I'm going to record prior to this airing, so maybe that'll inform the numbers at some point. But right now, 27% Brian Cunningham.
Yeah, I think that's about right. Maybe a little higher, but
So
I
you're
think
taking
that's right.
above.
Yeah, I'm going above. I would put it, if on Kalshi they have the list, I would put it like below Mosley, but above the 27.
Yeah,
I
you
think
went at 50% for Walter
I
Mosley.
did.
So
I did.
yeah.
Cunningham is again in that Mosley category of checks a lot of boxes. He's obviously been out there publicly, thirsty about it. So that obviously, makes the odds just a little higher because people are buying in. But again, another good pick. I think someone who being elevated makes sense for them in their political trajectory to go from the assembly to the statewide position is a great jump.
Can you
Yeah.
tell me anything about Brian Cunningham?
He represents Brooklyn.
And that's pretty much where my knowledge ends too, which makes me think that his campaign might be a little light on substance because the fact that we can't point to at this point some sort of law, the way we can with Zellner Myrie on a variety of things like clean slate, for example, or Walter Mosley.
Yeah, but that's, that not that I know the assembly member at all, so I have no reason to defend him. But that's just a function of being a junior assembly member, right?
Exactly. I'm not saying it's bad.
Yeah.
I'm not saying like this right out of the gate, but like Alex Borez, we can point to bills that are under his belt already that are major laws at this point. And
The one interesting thing is that both Brian Cunningham and Zellner Myrie represent the same part of Brooklyn, almost exactly.
who used to have that assembly seat?
Oh, I know this. I can't. Do you know?
Isn't it Diana Richardson?
Yes, yes.
That was what we were looking for. All right, so last on the list, he is the former Secretary of State. He is the head of DASNY, former Assembly member Robert Rodriguez. And this is not to be confused with Director Robert Rodriguez, who, when we ran those numbers, came slightly higher. But we've got Robert Rodriguez at 33%.
I think that's a good. I think I'll take it. Can I not go higher or lower?
No,
But am I allowed to agree with you?
agree. I love it. I love that, that's validation for the system and the coders here at Dispatches from Planet Albany.
I did like his work on Spy Kids. Um,
Not Desperado.
yeah, I think that's about right. I think it's like I think I've put that in the category of a safe pick, right? Checks a lot of boxes. He does not upset anyone per se. there's no real downside there. Again, the reason why I put Mosley higher is because he kind of checks all those boxes that I just said, but also you bring some of that like Brooklyn base with you. I don't know if Rodriguez kind of brings that similar political institutional backing with him. So that's why I would maybe put it a little below Mosley.
Yeah, I don't really have a good feel for Robert Rodriguez because I mentioned how Brian Cunningham is a little light on achievements in the assembly a few years out. I can't really point to any legacy of Robert Rodriguez in his approximately decade in the assembly. And
Yeah, and this is why assembly, why coming from the assembly is just not a place. To your point, there are certain members who do make a name for themselves, but this is why it's harder.
sure, that's why it's harder, but I think that also speaks to the caliber of the politicians or the policymakers themselves. And if we're looking at these choices as people who are valuable partners in government, then I would say, what is this person bringing of substance? Is it just electorally? Is it just on the surface? He's got a degree from Yale. He's got an MBA from New York University. So I'm guessing he's pretty smart, but I can't point to anything at Dasney and say, yep, he's done XYZ since 2024, or as Secretary of State, he did this, or we have some interview where this was a big deal. So I don't really know what happens on that front. And then we talked earlier about the idea of baggage. About a dozen years ago, while he was in the assembly, he was arrested for a DWI. So how does that come back to bite him in the butt if not?
Yeah, again, I think the governor is trying to not start any controversy, and
So
even
is a
though
DWI arrest disqualifying?
I don't think it's disqualifying, I think it's you get a couple articles written, and why do you need any distraction?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure they'll do a great job vetting this time around, right?
You would hope so.
Well, we've been speaking with Alex Elmasri. He's the Vice President of Operations and Growth for the Parkside Group and an aspiring gambling tout. Alex, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, David. This has been a lot of fun. Anything that involves politics and a little bit of light gambling is always a nice way to spend my Friday evenings. This is not on Kalshi, is it? Who's going to be the lieutenant governor? I'm looking
No.
now. I should have looked prior.
That's why I had to run my own technical numbers. We had to invest all of WCNY's infrastructure. Well, don't you need
Um,
someone to like set up and create the market, which to me sounds like you need to have like money up front. And my bets typically are $1.50 max.
I did place a $5 bet, which is my biggest one so far the other day. Anyways,
Well, as we said off air, you make more money than me.